Hello, my name is Andrew Masters, and I'm going to be talking about late Warring States period arms and armor, with a focus on the Qin Empire, as its evidence from the tomb of Qin Shi Huang and the Terracotta Army is the best that we have. So, when we talk about arms and armor, especially of the late Warring States period China, we have a little bit of a one-sided story. Since the Qin won, they have only their side represented. Obviously, there's a lot going on. You have states like the Qi, Chu, Yan, Zhao, Wei, and Han. They've all got their own types of militaries, and as you can imagine, they're quite different from the Qin military. Not all of them are the same. States a lot like the Yan and Zhao have a lot of influence from other peoples. Kind of like the Mongols, which are sort of the Qin's fault anyway. They don't come around until a lot later, and when they do, it's sort of a long-term cause and effect sort of thing that happens as a result of the Qin's actions in pushing people out of the Ordos Plateau. But that's not the point. We're going to go ahead and talk about what we do know. And what we do know is limited because, of course, the battlefield's a chaotic place where things are constantly changing according to what kills the other guy best, what technology was used this week, that week, and it changes rapidly, which is really difficult for people from an archaeological standpoint to keep up with things, or rather to go back through things. So what we do know is a couple of things that the Qin were really good at, like preserving their weapons and apparently building tombs, as well as organizing huge amounts of labor. The economy at this time was based on the single peasant who would farm a small plot of land and who would sometimes be recruited into the military of the Qin state at one point, and then eventually empire. Being so vastly important to the economy and the military, the peasant takes a primary role in what we're going to be talking about with regard to late Warring States period arms and armor and the Qin Empire's military. The infantry are just one of a number of slots in the Qin military, but they were the primary role. Infantry are divided into light and heavy, and we're going to go ahead and take a focus first on all the infantry and their types, as well as their armor and weapons, before we move on to our subjects of archers and cavalry. So, the light infantry, pictured here, they're the guys without any armor on, which is sort of a sad state to be in, but could be the state if you were poor, just recruited, and didn't have a lot of training. The military hadn't invested a lot of money in you yet, so you weren't so valuable. If you were lucky, you might move up and get a sort of leather brigandine bib. It's got scales of hardened leather studded to each other. In the later periods, they were able to use nails to do this, though commonly you would just use some sort of sinew or string, which would strap the pieces of leather together, and it would form a sort of bib which goes over the front of you and protects your front, obviously not your back. It's a little motivation to keep from running. Now, light infantry had polearms. This is significant. Polearms allow you a strategic advantage over, in the early Warring States period, charioteers, but in the late Warring States period, cavalry. What they do not protect you from is arrows, and that is why these light infantry are used for shock and skirmish, and had to move quickly so that archers couldn't get a fix on them and take them out with only a couple volleys. So, let's go ahead and look at their weapons, which will overlap with the heavy infantry as they carried some of the same weapons, and we'll focus on the interesting parts of Chinese technology and the development of Chinese weaponry with regard to the spear, the ge, and the ji, or in English we would call it a halberd. So let's start with the spear. Pretty basic. If you're going to make a weapon, probably the first weapon you're going to make is a spear. It can essentially be a sharpened stick, or in this case, bronze-tipped shaft, or by the late Warring States period, they're getting iron, and a lot of Qin weapons were actually made out of iron. Many swords were iron, lots of halberd heads and spearheads were made out of iron, but you're not going to bury that, and if you're going to do it ceremoniously, you're going to want to use bronze, because that is the norm, as is ritual. So the spearheads here are going to be bronze. Now, Qin spearheads are going to be very utilitarian, not very flamboyant in their appearance, and you can see here this one is made sort of broad. It's got a nice tip to it. It's for being agile and for stabbing. It doesn't have a lot of other uses though. So there's another type of weapon. Now this weapon, the ge, is made for taking down cavalry. There's a lot of debate on the exact angle that you need to have the blade of the ge, because at too high an angle, you cannot hook anyone, and one of the primary purposes of this weapon is to hook the cavalrymen as they ride by from their horse or chariot, and tear them down, or you could get them from the back of the knee, or any other gruesome options are at your disposal. So the ge is quite useful for against cavalry. Now, the flip side for this angle question of the blade is if the angle is too steep going down, well, then it doesn't quite work for slashing. So there's a nice medium, and it's been found that 100 degrees is apparently the perfect degree to have your blade for your ge. So if you plan on making one, there's your option. So what the Chinese found is that if you combine the spear and put it on top of a ge, you get a halberd, which allows you to stab, slash, hook, all the things that you want to do in one simple weapon. This becomes the staple of the Chinese infantry and is what most of them carry. So now we've gotten to the heavy infantry. Now the heavy infantry have a lot of money spent into them. They're career soldiers, they're professionals. As the fallen terracotta soldier here shows, they're going to have a leather jerkin over some bronze plates, which are going to be held together by usually red cloth or yarn of some sort, and they're going to be nailed together, and these are going to form these lamure or brigandine sort of armors, which cover them in plates and allow for a lot of movement while still allowing a lot of protection. These guys are well protected. They've also got shields, obviously not of bronze. This one is ceremonial and to be buried, and they'll often carry a sword as well as their polearm. The swords are going to be curved like this one, or they're going to be straight. And one thing that we found in the Qin tombs is that they're extremely well preserved, and that a lot of the weapons that are buried in Qin tombs were used in battle. Next up in our analysis of Qin troops from the tomb of Qin Shi Huang is going to be archers. So, as far as archers go, we're going to shown here in formation. There's a couple of ranks of archers, and there's going to be the newer archers, which are going to be using sometimes compound bows, but by this late period in Qin times, they're going to be using crossbows. They are armored. They're professional soldiers, so just like the heavy infantry, they've got that full armor. They're extremely valuable troops. They're trained by a few years into the Qin military. You're trained enough to be an asset. And so, like I was saying, they're all in this position to be carrying their crossbows. We found a lot of arrows from Qin tombs, which are going to show that they were even equipped with arrows, the terracotta warriors. And the arrows are going to be of iron and bronze. So, they're using these crossbows. Let's go ahead and take a look at them. Now, this isn't going to be the one that everyone's going to be carrying, but it's a pretty accurate representation. It's a crossbow, as you might imagine. What's important about the Qin crossbows is that they became extremely powerful and extremely accurate. One of the numbers that I read off of the Travel China site was that they could shoot up to 800 meters at the power greater than the compound bow, which is obscene to think of. So if you're delivering that much damage at that sort of distance, there's simply no competition except for cavalry and other different types of units. So the archers, while support class, were invaluable. So the only way to defeat archers is with cavalry. Now, the first form of cavalry in ancient China is going to be chariots, which have been used for a pretty long time, and they date back to Shang times. Here we're going to show a charioteer with his extremely specialized armor, which would not allow for any other kind of fighting except driving that chariot. Chariot teams are going to consist of 3 men with a couple of guys using pole arms on the sides, or they could be using ranged weapons. The pole arms are going to be things like the ge with multiple blades. The horse produces all the power, so you don't need to actually swing that heavy object. Now on the chariot, there are 4 horses. The 4 horses are because the 2 on the inside are the experienced horses, or the ones that are your favorites. The other 2 are kind of expendable. So while this image isn't entirely accurate, it does show the needed specs of the chariot with the 4 horses and the team of 3. Cavalry, introduced to China in 307, well, at least as the first Chinese corps of cavalry, were an adaptation from the nomadic use of horses and required the adoption of pants, which was kind of odd for the Chinese who like to use their robes. Anyway, these cavalry caught on as they're extremely useful and tactical, and by the end of the Warring States period, the waning of the chariot gave way to the waxing importance of cavalry. So here we have a cavalryman standing next to his horse. You can see that he's, well, pretty light armored. There were heavy cavalry, and it's believed that they used armor which included a helmet, which is strange, as you may have noticed, from the rest of the unit's armors. Of course, constructing the chaos and bringing order to the battlefield are the officers and the generals. Shown here is an infantry officer. He's got pretty good armor, he's in the thick of things, and he will be carrying a pretty high quality sword as well as possibly a polearm and shield, and he'll be directing his men directly on the battlefield. He will be giving orders, and he'll be deciding what happens immediately in his vicinity. Of course, much more removed from the battlefield, as shown by his sagely long and pretty hindering sleeves, is the general. At this time, generals were part of the educated class. They were scholars who studied the military. They were quite good at what they did, and they dedicated their lives to the practice of commanding their men. They're the ones who figured out the ways to conquer the entirety of the Chinese Empire. These generals are going to be the ones in charge of commanding and organizing these units so that the light infantry move in first, the heavy infantry move in second, the archers are supporting the entire time, and at the end, the cavalry clean up the mess. These men are responsible for the conquest of many of China's greatest states and for the rising of some of its greatest empires. That's all I have time for. Thanks for watching, and here are my references.